Hello, RoahmMythril here once again, getting back to RoahmMythrill 3, and it's time for the judge commentary on the last couple of stages we just played through. Starting with 131st place, Radium Man by the Blade Rodent. 43.20 with a 3.8 in difficulty, 13.4 in design, 7.2 in fun, 8 in creativity, 8 in aesthetics, and 6.6 in functionality. Mick. Looking at this level, two words come to mind: unfocused and unpolished. I can see the potential for an interesting concept buried in here, as it has a lot of the ingredients necessary to make something fun and unique. However, it's a bit like an early baker's everything bagel. It has a little too much everything to really shine. Specifically, this uses 5 to 10 different gimmicks and over 20 different enemy types. That's far too many for one level, and it leads to a ton of redundant concepts and one-use enemies. More prominently, it results in a lot of untapped potential, which is a shame as some of these could be really good. My best example of untapped potential is the Rising Nuclear Water. It only shows up in one room, and that one room is long, unimpressive, and has incredibly awkward design that can kill you easily. It could have been used for something like a chase sequence, especially with the Astro Walls, or it could rise and fall at a rhythm as you traversed a series of platforms at different heights. These are just a small collection of possibilities, but there's a lot you can do with just a small selection of gimmicks. Personally, I'd advise dropping the main gimmicks down to just the radiation liquids, drops and pools both, the Astro Walls, the nuclear canisters, and that one cool set piece with the Shrink Ray. Then, bring the enemy types from 20 plus to around 6. That'd put this more in line with the standard Mega Man level, and I think it would create a much better result. I'd also change the mini-boss into something less nonsensical, and tone down Radium Man's rod attack so it doesn't persist for several seconds for no reason. With those changes in place, I think this level would be a lot more fun to play. Shinryu. While the theming is certainly on point, I can't exactly praise this level for much else. Simply put, this stage is all over the place, especially when it comes to the gimmicks. Each one gets its own dedicated section, which isn't a bad idea on its own. The problem is that once a section is done with, the previous gimmick is dropped completely in favor of a new one, never to be seen again, and so on. The waterfall and barrel segment is easily the best part of the level, to the point where I wish there was more of a focus on them. On the far opposite side, however, you have the moving pillar and spike segment. Aside from the frequent glitches that can cause you to phase through the pillars, the placement of the Swallone at the end is what ruins it. You already have a rather tight and demanding section with instant death as the punishment for failing. The last thing it needs is an awkwardly placed enemy that can easily blindside the player. All of this is topped off with a boss that could have been fun if not for one major flaw. The lingering effects from the rods he tosses out last way too long. It's strange considering the custom Picket Men enemies in the stage have a similar attack, but the resulting explosion effects don't last anywhere near as long as Radium Man's. I've had fights with him where he's coated the entire floor in those radiation blasts, which made it virtually impossible to avoid taking damage. One of those fights ended with the energy element landing on one of those lingering blasts, which forced me to wait for several seconds before it disappeared since one more hit would have killed me. If that isn't a sign that the boss, and his stage for that matter, could have used more playtesting, then I don't know what is. Patchy. Holy moly, enemy spammy. There is so much stuff being flinged into your face for just the first few screens it's not even funny. Multiple enemies cluttered to ambush you at every half screen, together with new gimmicks introduced in this chaotic environment, with no chance for the player to be given breathing room, resulting in deaths that feel really unfair to the player. The stage in general is just super unfocused and features so many enemies that serve to knock you around like a beanbag, pummeled into acid pools, death pits, crushers, what have you. It doesn't look like the stage calms down from asking for insane maneuvers out of the player later on either. Difficulty curve is non-existent, it's all high all the time. The stage also suffers some slowdown with so many of the oil drum objects being spawned in that one screen. Yeah, I think that was having an effect on the music actually. Music choice really matters. Picking a song that isn't intended for long hearing being put into a full-length stage, it gets really irritating and demotivating to continue playing after a while. Radium Man, I guess his sprite looks decent. His fight consists of area denial with those lingering toxins, and you can manipulate where he throws them in a way, but I don't think you can really stop him from covering the whole arena, which could lead to catastrophic results. Flashman85. I wish I could write a more glowing review, but I've got to discuss a mass of critical issues. I see what you did there. Rising Acid/Slime is unforgiving. I wish the acid slime drops disappeared upon hitting the surface of the liquid below. I glitched a couple of gimmicks, and I found 3 different ways for players to mess up the level flow after Proto Man appears. I should also address the elephant in the room. The mini-boss drops the ball in every way. Again, I see what you did there. I approve of puns. Based on the power-ups strewn everywhere, I can only assume you're aware of how difficult the level is. Too many objects are in too small of a space, which hurts the learning curve, puts a damper on a no-damage buster-only run, and clutters the visuals. The cooling rod area is an improvement, though still too difficult from the combination of constant precision and omnipresent instant death. Only the thoroughly charming micro zone feels properly balanced for a Mega Man level, and it's a shame the easiest part is at the end. That just makes me feel bad for how many times I died there, because, yeah, I am stubborn about just seeing how well I can do with just the Buster, and Water Shield would have made that part a lot easier. I have to assume that's kind of what was intended, because, yeah, the rings, they got me quite a few times. Concluding the level is a mostly solid boss fight with, well, he looks like he's from The Simpsons, which I guess is appropriate. Radium Man's pattern is just right. Though the explosions linger longer than necessary, the bombs can be tricked to spawn in the ceiling if you jump high enough, and neither hazard disappears when he dies. I'm a big fan of how the boss chamber looks. Here and elsewhere, it's neat to see such a creative application of dev kit tiles. Even with a few color schemes that don't quite work for me, the aesthetics overall do a good job of creating a sense of place. Theming is a strong point. Despite the level having the memory of a three-eyed goldfish when it comes to what the enemy roster is, the core challenges of each section are creative and make total sense with the premise. And Ace Spark. So this level can decide if it wants to be a decent level or a horrible level, and is split between its first and second halves. It does not get off to a very good first impression, with constant bombardments of enemies that do not mix, and new concepts thrown at the player in completely dangerous situations. This is one of the places where lack of safety prevents any sort of game plan on the part of the player, and results in the player damage boosting in order to get through. When on the hovers, there is very little room for dodging enemies and projectiles in a heavily timed situation. Oftentimes avoiding damage or even just survival requires clairvoyance, and in some cases it seems utterly impossible. Many elements in the first half of the level are counterintuitive. For example, getting through the rising acid room requires the player to wait an exorbitant amount of time before they even start moving. Otherwise, the result is the acid combing you to death. Pretty sure that that's comboing. I don't think the acid styled my hair. This room also does not offer any safe spots in places where it looks like there should be. Perhaps the acid should have started halfway up the room? The Paizo room is far too cramped for the mini-boss used. The enemy requires pretty precise movements, and the layout here makes things far too unreasonable to pull off. The second half is a lot better in terms of enemies and how reasonable the challenges are, particularly the barrel platforming section. Some highlights were the waterfalls and the subatomic platforming room. One of the best qualities about the level was the perfect checkpoint placement, which meant it never got frustrating. Except for the shifting wall room, which harks back to the first room requiring clairvoyance and having nowhere safe to stand. I did not manage to avoid the swallowing at the end and had to damage boost through the section. Pretty sure I did too. Radium Man himself cannot decide between the two halves of the level and can be immensely frustrating. One of his attacks comes with no warning and robs you of anywhere to move. On the other hand, if he uses the other two attacks, he dies fairly reasonably. Had this boss used AI rather than RNG, this would have been a much better fight. Aesthetically, the level looked fine, but the music was a horrendous choice. It was not written to be used in such a long level. So, yeah, overall this stage, I kind of agree with that. I think I liked some of the later sections more than the earlier sections, and yeah, the Rising Acid Room, it felt like the timing should have been a bit different there, because yes, if you don't just sit there and wait for a bit, you're in trouble. Notably, the thing about one-use enemies and some of them requiring clairvoyance, I feel like one of the biggest examples of that for me was the bee, that you're having to try and deal with the smaller bees while on the falling canisters. That part felt hectic, and I think that was the only bee in the level, so yeah, that does feel a little bit weird. Stylistically, I loved the shrink ray area. The way that was laid out was really cool. And the rings honestly fit the aesthetic of that area. But yeah, they got frustrating for me, though that was purely me making things harder on myself. That's on me, I fully admit that. But yeah, it's it's amazing how a very simple enemy, like Ring or Telly, something small that goes away in one hit, can be such a hindrance in tiny platform jumps like that. Radium Man himself, I thought was actually a fairly cool boss. I didn't run into some of those problems like the blast areas lasting too long, I didn't have the energy element land on one. So overall, I didn't really have too much trouble with the fight, though I was confused by the bomb dropper at the very end, because things at that point got so hectic, I didn't really get a feel for exactly how it worked. But, yeah, overall, a pretty decent boss, I would say. Not bad overall. Next up, we had 130th place, Top Man 2, Spin or Go Home by Chicken Parm. 43.51, with a 3.6 in difficulty, 14.6 in design, 11 in fun, 7.2 in creativity, 7.6 in aesthetics, 5.4 in functionality, with a 5% time penalty. Mick. An attempt to make a bigger and better Top Man stage, eh? Considering the original was a victim of rushed development and unfortunate circumstances, I can see the appeal, despite the risk to the creativity score. Did it work out? Kind of. The new top platforms are the shining element. While they get a bit spammy sometimes, they also have a number of twists and turns to make them a lot more interesting, namely ghosts and explosive tops. A personal highlight was the Super Giant top, turning the spinning behavior into a combat obstacle, and Green Top Man was a fun fight. I also appreciate that it's relatively obvious which type of top is which. Yes, it's color coding, but I feel like this might actually work with color blindness. Flash will be the judge of that. Huh. Has that come up before? Honestly, don't remember if it has. I'm not sure I knew Flashman was colorblind. I wonder what variety of it. Unfortunately, the rest of the level is awkward at best. The enemies here are either underused or dull, and there's a few one-to-one recreations of Top Man stage that really hurt the creativity score, as well as causing arbitrary rush coil usage because, of course, Mega Man 3 has that. Beyond that, the level has a lot of broken animations, some very unclear ladders, and a few different pieces that outright struggle to function. In particular, the big Mecha Kero tends to teleport whenever it turns around. The giant top doesn't respawn properly. Yeah, I ran into that one. And there's one spot where the camera can be headache-inducing with how it slides around, which has thankfully been fixed. I wonder where that was. Rough level design is one thing, but these broken and busted bits hurt the experience that much more. It can be difficult to appreciate a level when it feels like it's held together by duct tape and silly string. Shinryu. Given the choice, I'd honestly rather go home. And that's largely due to this level being plagued by a number of technical issues. There's minor things like certain background tiles flashing while the rest has no animation. Then there's more serious ones, such as one of the spawners for the top platform suddenly not working, along with the new mini-boss's sprites not being centered, causing it to snap to different positions when it turns to jump. Not to mention it fires at you before it even spawns in. Yeah, I did at least notice that. The worst of these actually comes from the camera, when it jerks to the side during a pretty crucial jump later in the level. Okay, so the only camera thing I noticed was that weird thing when you're falling down into that one room, and I wondered if that was an intentional hint that there was something over to the side or not. It at least worked to get me to look over there. But they also said that the camera thing was fixed, so that must not be it. All of this really makes me question how much playtesting went into this stage before it was submitted. The level design only reinforces this question. Some of the earlier parts of the stage are pretty decent, albeit with some odd things here and there, like how you need utilities just to get past Tama's room. Things start to get messy once you reach the room with the second token, which, by the way, is an absolute pain to get. I didn't find the second one too hard to get. I mean, honestly, that was the only token I even got on my first run. We'll discuss that later. A lot of the rooms afterwards are either really cluttered or don't have much going on. The rising section in particular, while neat in concept, is oversaturated with enemies. The rest of the rooms aren't really that distinct enough to comment on. Although there is one part I noticed that was ripped almost directly from Top Man's original stage, but reversed. On that note, Green Top Man is probably the most enjoyable part of the level. The larger projectiles and timings required to avoid them made for a fun twist on an otherwise vanilla boss. It would have been a pretty solid end to the stage, if not for the room afterwards. I honestly thought the magnet beam was required to reach the energy element at first, until I realized that those girders in the background were actually ladders. Yeah, I completely lucked into learning that those were ladders just by holding up in an opportune time. I wouldn't be as upset over this if there were some hints to this earlier in the level, but there's zero indication for it. Sadly, I ended up leaving this stage feeling pretty annoyed. There's definitely some nice ideas here, such as variants of the top platforms and the Green Top Man's boss fight, but they're bogged down by rough execution with the level design, along with numerous technical issues. Patchy. Too fast. Too spin harder. Oh, I do not like the bright red background at all. It's kinda hard to look at. Thankfully, the later part of the stage subdues it with a much more comforting night color. Also, more remix stages. Well, at least with this stage it sticks to the theming and actually expands on the original concept. I like the variety of the different types of spinning top platforms, except the white one, which is kinda meh, only serves to screw you over in the random spawn chaos. Some of the tokens are annoyingly placed. Second token is of course hidden away in one of the random openings of the elevator section. Wasn't that the third? Third token is annoyingly hidden away by a leap of faith screen transition, and it seems to be heavily RNG dependent because it may spawn a white top on parts where you'd need a real platform. Doesn't help that all the tops seem to have very low spawn rate here. And that'd be the fourth. The middle part of the level feels like a huge difficulty spike compared to the rest of the stage, full of instant death hazards with no checkpoints throughout, either until the end of the giant top elevator ride. There's also the room near the end where the camera kinda snaps around back and forth while you're platforming across, which can be a bit disorienting. Flashman 85. Is Go Home still an option? Because this level has spun out of control. All the ideas are there for a great Top Man remix. Exploding and fake-out top platforms are super clever, and there's sufficient color contrast for me to tell the non-flashing platforms apart. So yeah, I am legit curious about that. Like, colorblindness, it's not something I've ever experienced, so I don't know exactly what that's like. I know there are different types of it and different levels of it, so I wonder exactly what Flashman's level of it is. Although they'd look nicer with new graphics befitting their size, a humongous elevator and not so many Mecha Karo mini-boss are fun additions. Secretly climbable background architecture offers a lot of possibilities. But then you also have Vicky, Bubican, Cannon, Elican, Hammer Joe, New Shotman, Parasue, drop platforms, and multiple flavors of Sparkman platform. New elements are fine, but that's an entire separate level's worth of assets on top of the other new things and everything that was in Top Man's original level. Unfocused and overwhelming are words that come to mind. Part of the problem is a lack of restraint in the number of objects on any given screen. The official games rarely require you to keep track of more than 3 or 4 different things at any one time. This level routinely throws down double, if not triple, that amount at the player. It's not that the challenges are fundamentally bad. Again, the ideas are there. It's that most screens would benefit tremendously from the Thanos treatment. Several enemies have been given an unflattering makeover. Background lights are incorrectly animated, flashing platforms are too flashy. Backgrounds in general could use some polish, but I can tell that thought and effort went into them. I count several architectural oversights, e.g. soft lock potential after the cat fight, awkward screen shifting in the area near the last token. It's easy to glitch the humongous elevator out of existence. The Mega Mecha Karo needs a nearby checkpoint and more playtesting. Among other issues, it can jump through the floor and leave you stranded. Oh dear. Sorry I couldn't put a more positive spin on this one. Flashman's just full of the puns today. Again, I approve. And Ace Spark, another stage that feels like it's about to fall apart at the seams. I got soft-blocked a few times here, including the giant resized mid-boss despawning due to having the gall of turning left whilst next to a wall. Oops. Or often, a screen transition leads to unavoidable damage as you walk into an enemy, or on occasion, into a death pit. I'm pretty sure I experienced both of those. Yeah, the stage design itself is a bit of a mess. And there is a severe lack of polish in general. Can Mega Man make it out of the Tama boss room without utilities? No, and it doesn't even look intentional. Gimmicks can get themselves despawned and leave the player up a creek without a paddle, since nothing stops them from flying off screen. And frankly, you can spend a rather silly amount of time for the large top spawners to give you a valid platform, rather than the, gray one that has no collision, simply due to RNG. Checkpoint placement also seems arbitrary, with the stupidly large top platform room really feeling like it needed something before it. Otherwise, there's a lot of rather instant death-heavy levels, and a mini-boss to get back to when something goes wrong. Yeah, we will discuss that one. For what it's worth, I like the new variants on the dev kit gimmicks. One of them, the horizontal Sparkman platform, if I didn't know any better, you'd swear it was part of the dev kit. It's an obvious addition, and I assume it's going to get added in the next contest. And while I give the top spawners flack, I like the explosive variant. It's a cool change, and just a shame that bypassing most of the rooms using it comes down to sheer numbers of spawned objects, rather than a more deliberate challenge. And whilst I mentioned an instant death heavy segment earlier, those few rooms leading to the mid-boss actually present an interesting challenge to bypass. Shame about the checkpoint. To briefly touch on tokens, I think the first one was clever. Granted, the clue to where it resides is actually given much further into the stage than it needs to be, but that's fine with me since said token is also so early in the level that it takes mere seconds to collect on a revisit. I'll give token 1 a pass. The others, no. These are heavily bungled. I don't mind tokens that are sneaky, but there really are no such clues to their locations, and the one within the absurdly chonky giant top lift area is particularly egregious. I agree with that one. The Revent Top Man certainly exists. I'll always applaud stages trying to do something new with the dev kit bosses, but the exploding top in this fight just throws a monkey wrench into it. When you learn how it works, you can reliably avoid it, but a total lack of visual tells on the tops here make it come down to sheer brute force trial and error more so than a normal boss. If the boss had novelty, I wouldn't mind this trial and error aspect as much, but Top Man's base AI is kinda lacking. Not everyone's like me and is more willing to try and learn rather dull and lackluster bosses, when in this case, face tanking the tops to avoid Top Man's contact damage is also a viable path to victory. Pretty sure that's how I got through it too. So, a lot of this stage's issues, I feel like, probably came down to a time crunch. After all, we saw that this stage got turned in late. Only a 5% penalty, but a penalty nonetheless. Whether this was due to procrastination, which I know all too well from days in school of, oh, I'll just do the project the day before it's due, I was kind of bad about that. Or if it was just real life getting in the way, which I know that one all too well too. So, I feel like it's something that a lot of the issues could have been caught as issues if the creator had had more time for playtesting. I'm kind of going with that idea. Because a lot of the issues I had here, it does feel like it comes down to technical difficulties. And a lot of it deals with the top spawners. There were a lot of areas where it felt like they were just broken. That it wouldn't be the thing that it would just, you'd be waiting for a while for a green top to show up so you can actually get across. It's just sometimes the generators didn't make anything. Like, I feel like that was especially true in that one room that you go into. It's a single room, and there's supposed to be 3 levels of the tops going through, but it's like they get halted by the fact that there's the nut and bolt enemy in the way until you spawn that and it goes away. Whether that's intentional or not, I don't know, because it feels like that happens in other areas that don't have enemies in the way. Most notably, some stuff I was dealing with in the room with the diamond token. Which that room highlights another problem of the top spawners. The fact that very often, they're based on RNG rather than a pattern. Looking back over the footage, it seems feasible, but extremely unlikely and unworth it that you could get across those 3 tops. Because if you're writing the first one down, there's like a split second you have to react to a second top starting to come up from the bottom. But you don't have a lot of time to look at it. So if it's not a green top, or if a top just doesn't spawn at all, you're in trouble. And I had a moment that I was sitting there watching those tops, where I think I saw 3 or 4 of the gray tops go by in a row, which would have meant just jumping into a bottomless pit. So, yeah, I feel like the tops should have been a bit more consistent, or maybe the gray tops should have been a lot more sparing in their usage. So, the other big thing is definitely the tokens. And they come in 4 variants here, and I don't mean the suits on them. The spade token was, how much are you paying attention? Which unfortunately I wasn't. I had lucked into learning that the girders were ladders, I just completely forgot to check that one where the spade token was. So that one is totally on me, and I accept that. The club token was, it's physical challenge time. And honestly, that one's right there, it's visible, you know where it is, and it wasn't that hard to get. The last 2. Oh boy. The heart token, I agree, was especially egregious. Because as you're riding up the giant top elevator, you've got so many side passages that Is something hidden beyond that? We'll never tell, because there is indeed no tell as to which one is the right one. And even if you go all the way to the top and try and go left, you can't go back there, even though if you get the token, that's actually where you come out. So there's nothing really indicating which is the right one to go through, and honestly, good luck taking out the enemies and moving fast enough to be able to check every side passage in one go. This is made even more complicated by the fact that, yeah, if you die during the elevator segment, you're going quite a ways back, because there really needed to be a checkpoint room between the mini-boss and the elevator segment. You have no idea how many takes I just didn't bother keeping because I got to the elevator room and almost immediately failed to check one of the side paths and had to go all the way back. You're welcome. And it also does highlight the issue of, yeah, once you get back out into the elevator room from that side, if you drop down to the bottom and think you're just going to ride the elevator all the way to the top again, nope, the elevator spawns late. And you just die. And then you have the fourth token, the diamond token, which requires a leap of faith that I'm still unsure if that weird little camera jolt was supposed to be a tell for that one. At least in my weird lizard brain, it got me to look over there, so it worked, intended or not. But then, like I said, the top spawning there feels kind of busted, to a point where just it made more sense to just use utilities to get over where I needed to go. So, yeah, overall, the stage was okay, but definitely needed more polish and playtesting. But it kind of feels like maybe the creator just ran out of time on that, which I totally get. But with that, that's where we're going to call it for now. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you're enjoying the series so far, and I shall see you again next time, which I think is going to be the end of Tier 4. So until then, fare thee well. Next time we interview a cactus. I can't wait.